Good morning, Lucy. I had the privilege of talking to Lucy Haislip, who's one of the top producers with SunTrust Mortgage down in North Carolina. And good morning, Lucy.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Okay. Lucy consistently knocks out close to a loan a day, and has been in the business. Well, when did you actually start, Lucy?
About 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And was this after you got out of Duke, or did you do something in...
Much longer than that. I'm an old gray-haired lady.
Hey, me, I'm an old gray-haired guy. How about that? We should date.
I'm happily married.
Yeah, me too. Back at you. 32 years.
I had done a whole bunch of different things after I left Duke, sort of trying to find what my niche was. And some of the things that I had done were sales-related. And when I found myself looking for something new, someone that I knew was running a department for a big bank that's in North Carolina that they were calling retail sales, and basically had salespeople trying to bring new customers to the bank. As big companies will do, the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing, and they did away with the department after having hired me only about 6 months before. But in the meantime, I had gotten my toes into lending and had enjoyed it. And so I set out to find a mortgage operation to work for, and the rest is history.
Well, did you start, when you did make that change, did you start off with what is you would call Crestar? Or?
No, I didn't. I started out with a company that was called Bank Plus that was based out of Texas.
Sure, and I'm familiar with it.
And they had originally been part of a savings and loan. The savings and loan had been taken over by Resolution Trust with all the other savings and loan failures. But the mortgage operation had been successful, so it had been spun off to a privately owned company. And I worked for them, and then they were bought by Barnett Bank in Florida. And then it was announced that Barnett was going to be bought by another bank who I knew I didn't want to work for because they had always given really terrible service. So we let the word out on the street that we were interested in going elsewhere and heard from a bunch of different companies, of which we chose SunTrust, what was then Crestar, what is now SunTrust.
Yeah, really good company, too.
Oh, definitely made the right decision. There's no question.
Yeah, well, wonderful people. It's one of the few institutions that I'm kind of intimately familiar with, and just a lot of just fabulous people, real good company to work with. And I say that because I always caution everybody we don't want to talk about anything proprietary to your company today, but it really is an excellent company. Well, when you started off with Crestar, where were you getting your business? In essence, did you have a couple of years behind you by that time?
Yes. In fact, I've only been with Crestar a little bit more than 2 years, so I had about 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you started off and when you were then a rookie, were you going after realtors initially, or how did you get your business when you started?
Well, primarily going after realtors, as well as I was lucky enough to start when a refi boom was starting. And it turned out to be a real good thing for me because I could learn on the refis without having realtors to fail in front of.
Yeah, right. Plus, it was nice to have that money, too.
It really was. So, we were getting what we called floor calls, just people calling to shop rates. And I think I am better on the phone than a lot of people and was always more than happy to answer people's questions and so forth. So I reeled more than my share of refi people in, and a lot of those people end up, moving after a couple of years after they've refinanced. I also was working realtors at the same time, so it sort of gave me some business as I slowly reeled in realtors.
Mm-hmm. Well, the business that you get today, is it primarily realtors and referrals, I assume, at this point?
It really is, I would have to say, 99.9%. The whole first year our Crestar branch was open, we were not in the phone book. And we don't put our rates in the list of rates in the newspaper here because the brokers all just lie like crazy and put in rates that they couldn't possibly deliver.
Don't they, though? We see. It's funny you said this, and we're going to get off track, but that's okay. It's my interview, and but that's. I just finished talking.
So So really, we had no way to have business that first year except, old customers, referrals from old customers, and referrals from realtors. And we did a ton of business. I did $26 million myself just with that, and nobody's heard of our company down here at all, because even though I work for a big bank, they don't have a banking presence in North Carolina. So,
what is your market area?
Most of the loans that we do are in Durham, some in Chapel Hill, some in the more rural areas outside of Durham. But Durham is part of what's called the Triangle area,
sure.
Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, and we really are a boom town. We've gotten a lot of good press about being a good place to live, as well as we've got a lot of big industries that are still bringing people in, as well as 3 major universities. So we've got a lot of real estate business going on.
What's your average loan amount down there?
It's not real high. My average is usually a little bit above $100,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so especially compared to a lot of the SunTrust people, it's very low.
When you're out there in today's market, what changes do you note? And let me tell you exactly where I'm headed with that question. Is the answer I'm looking for is what would help the loan officers out there now that are starting in business or just looking for tips. The question is, what do you notice that is different in today's realtor environment than when you started 7 or 8 years ago?
Well, there definitely are more realtor company-owned mortgage companies. I have never seen them as a big threat because they tend not to pay as well. They tend to pay about half as much per loan in my experience, which means that they get either poor or inexperienced loan officers. So they're not really a threat. To me, everybody looking at prices on the internet is mostly hurting those brokers that were just chasing price and just always trying to be the person with the lowest price. I've never had the lowest price in town. My prices have always been sort of in the middle of the normal pack. But I have gotten my referrals by treating people. Well, the company sends out a survey to everybody after they close their loan, and a lot of people write little notes on them. One of my customers the other day wrote that I had treated them like royalty, and that's sort of what I go for. I love that comment. I never thought of it as like royalty, but that definitely is what I'm going for. And with the realtors, they know that I know what I'm talking about. There's so many loan officers who tell them things that they can't count on actually being correct at the end, that neither the price competition nor the competition of an inexperienced loan officer being in the same building can hurt me on either of those things.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you said that, because I don't think there's anything worse, and feel free to contradict me, I don't think there's anything worse in this business than having a loan officer, and if you're a new one, it gets triple compounded, that either lies deliberately or by omission or commission or whatever, but just shades the truth or whatever and gets caught. I think it's just like the kiss of death in this business.
And I think there's a whole other group that isn't intentionally lying. They're just shooting from the hip. They're just more sort of salesman types that are just going out there trying to shake hands and sort of answering a question the way they think the realtor's going to want it answered. The problem is they can't make the underwriter answer it that way once it gets to underwriting. And so they're promising the moon and they're unable to deliver. And it's way better to tell somebody you can't make something work before they have gotten in their car and spent a whole weekend showing somebody houses than to tell them that 3 weeks after they've gone under contract.
Does that happen?
It doesn't with me, but it does with an awful lot of the loan officers around.
No, I didn't mean that. Does it happen a lot where you're qualifying people and they're really just not going to qualify for what the realtor wants to show them?
Yes and no, I would say. It's not real common for me not to be able to work out a way for it to work for them, but it isn't always what they had initially been thinking they could do. For example, the parents who are thinking they're going to buy a place for their kid to live while they're in college, and they're thinking of buying it as investment property and think they can put less down than you could do as investment property. Well, I can still do that deal. I just have to explain to them how to do it with a non-occupying borrower and so forth. You do have the people, though, who have credit problems and just don't get it, think that they can waltz in even though they've never paid anything on time in their life and get a mortgage with almost nothing down and a great rate.
Do you know that Freddie Mac and I don't know if it's either Freddie or Fannie has a huge ad campaign around the country now about kids. It's directed towards kids who are 17, believe it or not. They even put the year 17 in the ad, and their basic premise is that in a lot of the colleges today, and even primarily in the junior colleges and some of the colleges, these companies are coming in and giving credit so easily. You literally have to go up to a table and they give you a beer mug with it, and off they go with $5,000 in credit. And they're finding that there's a younger generation now that's really getting clogged with credit and bad credit because they just don't understand the significance when they become 24 and want to buy.
Right.
And you're down in that area down there.
Right.
Well, let me ask you something. When you started off, you primarily went after realtors, I'm assuming, once this refi craze was over, which begs the question, how did you get business from realtors since you really didn't, you were just starting off new?
It's been long enough. I don't.
Come on, wake up.
Repress the pain. It's like not remembering labor pain.
Get that repressed memory.
Most of the realtors that I still do business with now, I somehow got the customer originally and then impressed the realtors, and they continued to send me stuff. Or those first few realtors I worked with would talk me up in the branches where they worked. I really never spent a whole lot of time going around to realtors' offices and shaking hands. An awful lot of the beginning loan officers around here just sort of go out in their car and just wander into realtors' offices, and there are several reasons that doesn't work very well. One is that most of the big companies around here don't let you pass the front desk at this point, so you don't really end up getting to meet anybody. Even if they do let you pass the front desk, the people who are sitting there and have time to just jawbone with you for 10 or 15 minutes usually are the ones who don't do any business. And lastly, the ones that do business really resent you sort of taking up their time. So I really never spent a whole lot of time just making cold calls to realtors. I mostly, when I got a loan, either by somebody having checked rates with me and ending up with me as their customer, tried to really keep the realtor informed and tried to give them particularly good service. When I had less business than I have now, I used to go to closings, which is a wonderful thing for a new loan officer to do. It's hard for one to do it once they get more established, since so many closings happen right at the end of the month. You can't be everywhere at once you have a lot, but it gets you around both the listing and selling agent, and they get to hear the customer say how wonderful you were. So that's a nice little thing to do.
But you raised an interesting question a minute back in your talk, and that is, what would you recommend that loan officers do? If, as you say, and there'll be some people that might challenge that statement, and I'll tell you why, but what does the loan officer do today when they're blocked, they can't get around, and sometimes going in and getting FaceTime is about all they can do? What do you think they can do creatively?
I don't know. I guess one thing is that there are an awful lot of different ways to accomplish this. I know highly successful loan officers who have gone about it in totally different ways, and I think whatever way you choose has to suit your personality.
Okay.
I don't have a real aggressive personality, so just doing cold calls wasn't real easy for me. With somebody who had more of that personality, that might be something that they could do in the same market very effectively. But I guess what I have done and what I would recommend is building off, once you do have some successes, building off of those. Once somebody has given you their name. Like if a customer I've done a loan for gives somebody else my name, that is just incredibly powerful. That person's going to need a real compelling reason to go to somebody else. And the same with a realtor. If one realtor has told another, boy, Lucy just did that loan and got it done fast, and she's done 4 loans from me, and every one's closed the day it was supposed to close with no gnashing of teeth, then that, no amount of cold calling is going to be as powerful as that referral from one person to another. The problem is how you get the whole thing started. And I guess calling people and making appointments to meet with them would be a much smarter thing than just wandering into offices.
And that's interesting because most of the loan officers are very that are successful out there are by their own descriptions, A plus, extroverted, whatever, but there is a segment out there, and I interviewed somebody a couple of days ago who was just like you, that really professed not to be as extroverted, and because of that, and they're reticent about making cold calls, and because of that, they do business a different way. And I find that there are listeners out there that are absolutely going to be able to relate to you and your personality. There really is a segment out there. Not everybody is gung-ho, jumps in the car and races over to the office. They do it one piece at a time by building relationships.
Yeah, I really have conceived of my job as a service job, not as a sales job. I'm paid as a salesman, and I enjoy that a lot. I really like being on straight commission. But what the things I concentrate on during the day are my customers and getting their loans closed and pre-qualifying people with enough detail that there aren't any details that could end up biting us in the end, and making sure their loans get closed and processed properly. And it has all sort of fallen from there because I have done all that right. Those customers and realtors have told people about me. And it's sort of a totally different way of thinking about the job since we're paid as salesmen. Most loan officers sort of see their sales as salesmen, and that's just sort of not ever the way I have seen or approached the job.
Well, as I told you, I thought that was rather profound, actually. As I said, there's a segment out there, I think, that has personalities that mimic yours exactly.
Uh-huh.
I know you might be a little surprised to hear that because I think your description of it being a service job is not something that somebody would normally think of that way, and yet if you have your type of personality, maybe that's exactly the way you have to think about it.
Uh-huh.
I talked to one of your contemporaries, Linda Tippy, and she views hers, I think she's a little bit of a mix of you in the sense that she views her job as 100% professional. She would no more go out to a movie with somebody that she does business with than the man on the moon. And yet she is very professional, as you know, and keeps her head down and just does an enormous amount of business.
She does.
Let me ask you, what about in relationships with your customers that you build up? Do you have a database that you keep, and do you keep in touch with them?
I always have, and that's anybody who doesn't is nuts. I mean, it is way easier to get a loan from somebody you've done a loan from before than it is to get a stranger to give you a loan. And I have always, when we made the change, made sure that all my old customers knew exactly where I was, and that was how we managed to do the business we managed to do that first year when no one had heard of our company or weren't in the phone book and so forth. And what I do is it sort of depends on whether I have support staff to help me and how busy I am, but my goal is about every 3 months to send something to my customers in the mail that has my name and phone number on it. In practice, it has probably been only about every 6 months, but I think every 3 months is much better. And I think what you send them, again, should sort of mimic your personality, and it almost doesn't matter what you send them. It's just sending them something so that they know, number one, they still remember where you are, because, all of our companies keep changing things.
That's right.
Even though I've only made one real change, I have had 5 different company names to work under. The other thing is that, if somebody bought a house 4 years ago, they may not remember your name even if they really liked you. But if they have gotten something in the mail from you every 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months, then they do remember you. In December, I handwrite Christmas cards to all of my old customers, and at this point, that's something like 800 or more. You lose some who move away out of town and you don't get their new addresses, and you also, since you have duplicates, it brings the number down some. But I handwrite a Christmas card to each one of those, and if I run into customers in July in the grocery store, they say, "Oh, I got your Christmas card." They really appreciate it. There isn't any other person that has, quote-unquote, sold them something in the past year, usually, who has sent them a Christmas card. The other things that I send, we subscribe to a little service that's called, actually, they just changed their name to Working Like a Dog. It used to be called Snickerdoodle. And they produce little things that they send you once a month that are not mortgage related. What they do is they find little articles or things written in various places and get permission to reprint them. And I just send something with my name on it. Sometimes it's a recipe. Sometimes in the springtime it might be tips on making your grass look good. In the fall it might be tips on winterizing your home. I never send them anything mortgage related. It's just something that lets them think about the fact that I'm still there and still want the business.
Now, is this a private company that you contract with?
Yes, it is.
What's the name of it again?
It's called Working Like a Dog.
Where are they based?
They are based out of Cleveland, South Carolina. And do you want the phone number?
Yeah, why don't you throw it out there for everybody?
864-878-8580. And what they do is once a month they send you this package that has sheets that they recommend for realtor use, and it's mostly like sales tips or organizational tips, as well as things that they recommend to you for use with customers, as well as a sheet that they recommend for you to send if you've got a database of like attorneys and accountants and that sort of other professional person. And I don't use their things every month. I don't send something out once a month, and some months I like what they send better than others, but they always have a fairly cute drawing on them, as well as some nice thing about something interesting, and there's enough variation there that getting it every month, at least once a quarter, I've got something that I really feel good about sending out. It's not expensive. I can't remember exactly how much it is, but it's not expensive.
Do you do the actual mail out yourself?
I have at times. Right now, we are lucky enough to have a person in the office who's actually the person who answers the phone, as well as doing some other office and administrative stuff, and she actually does the mail for me now.
It's kind of funny, though, that sometimes the low-tech stuff is the best stuff.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And a lot of people do these newsletters that are mortgage-related, but we're interested in mortgages. The customer isn't necessarily. So I sort of like sending something that isn't related to mortgages, but again, that sort of gets back to my whole personality and what I'm doing, and sort of making the customer realize that I'm interested in them as a person, not just as a sale.
Well, there's a point to that, because if they think you're interested in them as a person, I mean, that really gets to the core of our business, which is relationships.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, you say you have 800 people in your database. What database do you use, by the way? Do you use a computer one like ACT, or?
I actually don't have it on a database program. We just have it on WordPerfect, just a list on WordPerfect.
I see. A lot of people, for whatever it's worth, a lot of people are using ACT out there very successfully. Some of the newer versions, especially ACT 2000, are just fabulous. I couldn't live without it. Just in the ability, for example, if someone calls and I'm on a computer, I instantly can sort 10 different ways to Sunday and immediately pull them up. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they was telling me his accomplishments, and I said, "Oh yeah, you did like 118 million last year," and he was impressed. But all I did was click a computer. So, let me ask you something. In terms of relationship building, once again, with someone with your type of personality, and there are a significant amount of loan officers out there that fit your profile, what would you recommend that they do to bring in business outside of the realtor box, for example? Do you do any business with new homes or with CPAs or any other? Do you have alternative sources of business?
I haven't had a whole lot. When I first got in the business, I sent a letter to basically everybody I knew, telling them what I was doing, and that, you know, I have and did get some business from that. I have gotten a little bit of business from a few CPAs who I happen to know, but it has never been a flood.
Mm-hmm. What about settlement attorneys?
Closing attorneys?
Yeah, you're right.
I occasionally get something. It's just like us sending things to realtors. I don't very often have the opportunity to send anybody the other direction because they usually have a realtor when they contact me. The same with the closing attorney. Around here, generally the agent sets up the closing and all with a closing attorney. Lots of my customers don't even know who their closing attorney is going to be until a week before closing, well after they have needed to be in touch with a mortgage person.
Mm-hmm.
So there is the occasional, and actually that's one thing we've enjoyed about being at SunTrust. We have a closing package that the attorneys like better than others. One thing that we absolutely demanded, one reason we did not stay with the old company, the company that was buying the company we were with, but instead came here, is that SunTrust lets us have our processors and closers locally, right here in our office. So the attorneys are working here in town, are working with our same two people who they know very well over the phone. If, you know, I had a customer the other day wanted to change their loan amount 2 hours before closing. We were able to redo the closing package and get in the car and take it over to the attorney. So the attorneys do perceive a difference in our service and say nice things about us at closings as a result, but they aren't often in a position, in my experience, to send something to you.
Mm-hmm. When you let's get back to the relationship part of the deal. Do you have you found yourself with the realtors that you've become close to? Do you socialize with them, or do you keep it strictly on the professional side? What kind of relationships have you developed?
There is one group of three realtors and myself who have a purely social lunch one day a month. We have it set up for the same day, you know, the third Wednesday or something. I can't remember. I put it on my calendar. And we have just a purely personal lunch once a month. Other than that, I do absolutely zero socializing with any of my realtors. From time to time, I will take one to lunch, but that's much more sporadic than it probably should be. And I don't think ever once socialized in the evening with any of the realtors that I do business with.
That's it. So you're a version light of Linda Tippy.
Really?
Yeah, right. That's exactly the way she does it.
It's not really that I don't like them. I do like them. It's just, you know, we're all different, and our relationship isn't really like that.
Mm-hmm. Because the amount of loans that you do, how do you manage your time?
Well, it's not easy. That's probably the most challenging thing about our business once you get so that you've learned all the little underwriting rules and stuff. I work like hell. Returning phone calls is always been and will always be my number one priority. I mean, that's one thing that is so simple and so obvious that most loan officers don't do. I mean, I have had realtors introduce me to other realtors and say, "This is Lucy, she returns your phone calls promptly." Like they were saying, "This is Lucy, she can walk on water." And
kind of a backhanded indictment almost of the industry.
Else. Exactly. I mean, it's just sort of amazing that most loan officers don't, but I know from simply that they don't. I also, I don't know. How do I keep myself organized?
Do you work evenings? On weekends?
I don't work weekends if I can possibly help it. I work weekends very rarely. I never see customers on weekends. If I do have to come in on a weekend, I come in on a Saturday to sort of catch up on quiet time stuff. But try not to do that. But I work a lot of evenings. I do a lot of, in our market, we can always get the borrower to come to us. We really don't have to go out with a laptop to either the realtor's office or to the borrower. We can always get the borrower to come to our office, which really helps on time because you don't have the travel time. But a lot of borrowers, it suits best to come after work, and that works real well for me because that's time. If I didn't have a customer here at 5:30 or 6, I would be sort of tired to do any brain work, but having a customer gives me, an adrenaline rush so I can do an application just fine at 5:30 or 6. It also, if I do an application at 5:30 or 6, I don't come out of it to find 15 messages, which I frequently can if things are busy if I come out of an application during the middle of the day. So that's one thing that has really worked well for me. And I can get out of here. I don't have children, so I can get out of here at what's a reasonable time for me by doing that.
What is your, you mentioned something there about you have no trouble getting people to come to your office. What are some good reasons why you should do that, why people should come to your office?
Well, I think it's just incredibly better from the limited experience I have had of going to other people's places, either their homes or somebody else's offices. Number one, they are continually distracted in the other place. Especially people's homes is a disaster. They try to stir the pot on the stove and let the dog out and feed the children while you're trying to talk to them about things. Even in somebody else's office, you're likely to be distracted. And that's just sort of the first reason. Number two, I have, long before I worked for a company that gave me a laptop, I had a desktop computer that I used to crunch numbers and do my good faith estimate and stuff on, and I couldn't lug it. Number three, I had my reference materials here. If somebody walks in for the application and announces that they don't have their green card and they've been in the country for a year, I can pull my book off the shelf and look up those rules that I always forget about, what LTV that's going to mean and what programs I can do. Lastly, I've got my copying machine here and can make all their copies of all their stuff. Well, and not lastly, maybe the final thing is that they see my office, they can sort of tell that we're not sort of a fly-by-night operation working out of the trunk of our car. One thing really taught me something when I was a newer loan officer. An agent had sort of badgered me into going to their office to pre-qualify somebody. I met with them in Chapel Hill at this office to pre-qualify them, got in my car, drove back over to my office building, which is a 17-story building, and saw the customers getting out of their car. They had driven over here to meet with a different loan officer in a different company in my same building. And I didn't get that loan. I bet that other loan officer got the loan. Because, first of all, I probably either seemed fly-by-night or just a little bit too hungry, driving all the way to Chapel Hill to see them, whereas they came and saw his office, which is in a lovely building, which was the same building my office was in. They were willing to drive to him. They would have been willing to drive to me. I think it just sets up a totally different thing. We're in an odd business where even though we're selling people something, they have to do what we say or it doesn't work. They have to give us X pieces of paper. They have to listen to us when we describe how they have to get this gift and document it and so forth. And you have much more authority sitting on your side of your desk in your office than you do sitting at the table in the realtor's office with your briefcase, I think. So even though I treat them like royalty and are really warm and fuzzy, they've got to listen to me. And I think that they are more likely to do that in my office.
I think that's a profound statement. I think it makes absolute sense no matter what somebody's personality is. Now, there is a group of loan officers out there, and you're right, everybody's different. Everybody does it a different way, and they would absolutely disagree with you, but in terms of a presentation of a nice office, of having the authority, of having the research there, two stories come to mind on that, on the research side of it. It's a little known fact, but a true fact, that Albert Einstein never knew the speed of light. And the reason is he said he could never remember it. But he then had a comment after the sentence, and his comment was, well, I can't remember what it is, and even I can come close to what it is if I had to. But he said, but I always know where to go to get it. And the person he was talking to, he simply went over there, and he went right to the book on his library shelf and pulled it out, and he had it marked and everything, and he said, this is where it is. I don't need to know it. The other one is a story of from the purely power standpoint. I don't recommend our listeners do this out here, but the story is interesting, and of course that involves Admiral Rickover, and who was notorious, as you know, he ran the nuclear navy, really got it up and running, and was a full admiral, I think, way until, I think he retired at like 85 or 86 under presidential decree. But he was notorious for his interviews, of interviewing people at the Naval Academy, and he would only pick the very elite. One of the things he did, to get on message here, is that it's been denied for years, but there's enough people that seem to agree that he actually did it. He would have a chair where people sat in that was sawed down about an inch, and so that when the people came and sat down in front of them, they were always just a little bit lower than him, and he kind of had that visual power. And I know this is a tangential story. It doesn't really touch what you do, but I do think psychologically a good point can be made when someone comes into your office. By definition, they are giving up some control to you, which is a healthy thing.
That's right.
In our business, because ultimately you're trying to help them. Right. And if you say, I need this piece of paper, it's much better to be in a position where they say, okay, rather than, why do I need that? And, maybe I'll get it to you, maybe I won't.
That's right. For the same reason, a realtor should always have the customer call you. You should not call the customer. It doesn't work. If you call the customer and suddenly start asking how much they make and how much money they have and stuff, they don't want to tell you, even if the realtor has warned that you're going to call. Whereas if the realtor says, you must call and get pre-qualified, I recommend you call this person, or even if they say, I recommend you call one of these 10 people, that person, when they call, are going to tell you what you need without hesitation in a way that that same person wouldn't if you had picked up the phone and called them. So when realtors ask me to call somebody, I explain that to them and say, it's not that I'm lazy, I will be happy to call them, and if they call and leave me a message, I will return it promptly. It's not that I'm not calling them. It's that the first step has to be from them, or they just aren't willing to give me the information that I can't proceed without.
I kind of like that. How exactly do you affect that? In other words, if a realtor calls you are questioning them, have you prepped them that I will need, and if not, would you please call them back? Is that kind of the loop?
I mean, sometimes realtors will just call and say, well, I've got this customer, will you call them and pre-qualify them? And I just explain, basically like I just explained to you, that I would be delighted to pre-qualify them, but that they're going to perceive the call a whole lot differently if they call me, so that what I want the realtor to do is to call the customer and tell them to call me. And I have been able to explain it in a way that it doesn't piss the realtors off. The realtors realize that I'm experienced and I know what I'm talking about.
This is a real good tip here, believe it or not. I like that. And doesn't it really kind of get back into, there's nothing quite as nice as having a reference when someone calls you and said, you've been highly recommended by my barber,
Right.
He had isn't this nothing more than a version of that, where there's a reference going back from a realtor to the person to call you?
Right, exactly.
What about, let's talk about pricing a little bit. I don't always bring it up in interviews, but now and then I do like to talk about it. I know that because I know your company, you're not always lowest, you're not highest, but you're pretty much in the marketplace. Do you encounter a lot of pricing issues out there in the marketplace today?
Yes, it's sort of interesting. When there's a lot in the media about rates, people are more sort of aware of them than when there hasn't been a lot in the media. And it depends upon the borrower. There are borrowers who come to you and don't seem to even realize that anybody has a different rate. There are people who come to you and have done some shopping and know that maybe even that you're not the lowest, but you are the most helpful and your rate wasn't bad. And there are other people who are just, that's the only way they're going to make a choice is by price. And it's hard, I think, for anybody who isn't going to just outright lie about rate to the customer to ever get that customer. Because there's always somebody in the market, if they call everybody in town, who will tell them a half a point rate lower on rate, and then if they come in the same day for an application, talk them into not locking and then jack their rate up the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're not willing to just out and out lie to people, now our company gives us some variability on rate, so I can quote my best available rate to somebody who's calling on the phone, but I don't just out and out lie and tell them a rate I can't give them, but other people in the market will. So I'm going to generally lose those people who are just shopping on the basis of rate, but let's face it, almost everybody does lose them. I mean, there's only...
Right, there are people that they just shop price. And actually, in some rare instances, when someone is doing a refi, it's a very pro forma deal. And as long, I think, as you get a company that's a good company, that I think rate can play a role, but only in that
defined. As long as it's a real rate, not a made-up rate that they're not really going to get.
Well, the typical example that has come across in the interviews, for example, on the internet, where some of the internet companies are quoting rates that almost seem too good to be true, but when you get their closing cost estimate, they're building in junk fees that are taking some of this back.
Well, and that is one thing that I do when I get a rate shopper on the phone. I recommend that they get an estimate of closing costs from everybody that they talk to or everybody they end up interested in. And I proactively volunteer to send them one because we have very low junk fees, and I know that.
I see.
And I don't send the regular good faith estimate, the official one that I print out to use with applications. I have one that I have done on a spreadsheet that has footnotes and stuff where I explain what some of the closing costs are, and I explain which ones I don't have any control over. I mean, sometimes you've estimated attorney's fees and title insurance and survey hire than somebody else is. The borrower doesn't know unless you tell them that those aren't fees you control, so that they're not fees that he should be comparing across lenders.
I want to stop you there. I don't like interrupting. I don't think people like people to interrupt, but I really like that. And I think our listeners out there are really going to, I suspect, because we put your email on the website, so people, or your webpage, whatever you want as a courtesy, I suspect you're going to get some emails on this because well-deserved ones, too. That is a great idea. I have said it time and time again when I do interviews that I've never done an interview where somebody didn't have something new of consequence to help them get business. And I think that's a fabulous idea, just a fabulous idea. And you just, kind of threw it away as, well, yeah, this is what I do. But if you think about it, well, if you think about it, I'm sure 98% of the listeners out there, when they do get into a contest of sorts over closing costs, you're right, they pull out the standard company form, fill it out, fax it over, and, this is why we're good and whatever. But I like your idea of using an alternative method. Now, whether someone's going to use a spreadsheet or not, the idea of doing explanations and explaining it out, I think it's just a fabulous idea.
And again, depends upon your market. Here in the Triangle area, we have the highest per capita PhD rate in the country, and we have all these scientists and other, very detail-oriented people who really are going to pick apart a good faith estimate and will read the little footnotes I put. Now, if you were mostly dealing with a population that wasn't detail-oriented and stuff, then it would probably be a waste of time. But, you know, the one thing you've got to do when you talk to your customer over the phone is get a feel for how much detail they want. Some people you're going to just overwhelm if you tell them every little detail. Other people, they're going to adore you if you tell them every little detail, and you've got to get a feel for what that customer wants you to do.
Yeah, it kind of correlates to another interview I did some time back where you really need to identify what the type of customer you're dealing with.
Right.
The customer you're dealing with where that spreadsheet would be particularly effective are Internet shoppers who are usually pretty sophisticated. As you say, professional people like scientists, people really anal retentive in the sense that they want to know every dot, every comma, whatever, which kind of reminds me of a story. And I really don't inject too much of myself in these other than to move an interview along, but I do remember when this has to be at least 25 years ago, almost at the height of the Cold War, where I had two people that came in. They were both about 25 years old. I will never, ever forget them. They were a husband and wife. They had just come in from Russia and at the embassy, working the embassy, and there was no question that they were spooks. Absolutely none. And I'd had it when I was in the service. I'd had a top secret crypto and had some pretty high clearances, even though I was in the combat arms, which was a little unusual. But I knew from some of the words they were using and the mannerisms and everything that they absolutely had been attached there. And so the story really is that every piece of paper that I gave them, every disclosure, and tell me if you ever heard of this, because I know you haven't. They literally sat next to each other. He took a pointy pencil and they touched, I'm telling you, touched every single word of every single form. And they would touch the word, go to the next one, and they would both sit there and went through this thing. I have to tell you, it took forever. They made absolutely no apologies. They didn't smile once. You would have thought that, if they didn't do this, that I was going to throw them in jail. It was the most bizarre and frustrating experience that I ever went through in all my years of mortgage banking.
Right.
Anyway, that's my detailed story.
Well, I actually have had, it only happens once in a blue moon, on the things that they sign at application, and we've got a fairly long thing that they have to sign in addition to the application. It's actually a pretty good form because it reminds you to talk to them about locking and escrows and various things, but it's 13 pages long, so I do a little brief synopsis, and 99.9% of the customers just sign it, and then, I give them a copy of it.
Sure.
Away. But I have had a few customers who have clearly started to read it word for word before they would sign it, and I just don't have the time to watch them do it. So what I tell them is that I don't want them to sign anything without feeling comfortable, but I also don't really want to watch them read it, and that I would be delighted for them to take it home and read it at their leisure or call me with any questions, and then they can sign it and mail it to me.
Right.
And I really don't want to pressure them into signing something they don't feel comfortable with. I don't think I should, and I don't think they would appreciate it. But I also am not going to sit there and watch them read a 13 legal page.
I did. You know what I used to do to take care of that problem? I had a version of that, but it was just as effective. But I like your way, and I like my way too. And what I would do is that when I would go in to do a loan application, and they would see this huge pile of forms, that they were going to have to fill, I would basically say, look, I really have two ways that we can do this, and I'm happy to do it either way. You can either sit here, I will spend as many, of course, I didn't want to spend a minute, but I would say I will spend as many hours as you like, and we can go through every single form, every single word, happy to do it, or we can do it, I call it Plan A and Plan B, or we can do Plan B. Plan B is I give you the stuff, you sign it, and you take it home and you read it at your leisure, and then if you have some questions, just give me a call.
Right.
I don't think I ever had a person and then I'd look them straight in the eye, because you had to be prepared to do the long one too.
Right.
And I would look them straight in the eye and said, whatever you're happy with.
Right.
And virtually 100% would say, well, no, we want plan B.
Right.
And then that would take care of the problem. You just say it, sign it. And that's exactly what would happen. If they would take it home and if they read it and had questions, they would simply call you back and on their specific question. And ultimately, I think it saves them time too.
Right. And that works better with an experienced buyer. A first-time home buyer sort of wants to go over. You sort of need to go over everything because they don't understand how everything works. But with somebody who's bought a house before, they generally know how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So they just spend less time.
I'm gonna end the interview here because I think there's like 3 or 4 things that you kind of bap right at the end here that I think are very valid, very helpful for the people, for the loan officers and executives and branch managers who teach, who were listening out there. And I want to thank you very much. I thought it was a wonderful interview, and the points that you gave were just excellent.
Well, great.
Anyway, well, thank you so much, Lucy.
Thank you.